Midrash, as if you've been here before or you heard last night, is an original Jewish legend that's based loosely on a biblical text. Traditionally, at Beth Adam, we base our Midrash on the particular section of the Torah that we have read that morning. However, I'm going to break with tradition this morning, because that is the tradition at Beth Adam, to break with tradition. And I'm actually going to set my Midrash 4 chapters later, in the 22nd chapter of the book of Genesis, several years later in the timeline. That story, drumroll please, is the binding of Isaac. You may know it as the story that we don't read on Rosh Hashanah at Beth Adam. I heard a rumor that Rabbi Bar will be discussing it a little tiny bit on Yom Kippur. But he gave a sermon many years ago about why we choose not to read that story here. You can find it online if you missed the sermon and you want to read it. But what I'm doing here is setting the Midrash a little bit later, and I want you to keep in the back of your minds the story that we just read as you listen to the Midrash. Isaac was exhausted. 3 days of journeying. His father Abraham had woken him early and had only told him to follow. And so the two of them went along with the donkey and the 2 servants. Isaac's mother didn't come that day, and Isaac wondered, had she fallen ill? His mother was almost always with him and his father, but not this day. For Isaac, this journey, he sensed that something was amiss. He and Abraham had started out so early in the morning while it was still dark. They were heading toward Moriah, not a place that they usually walk toward. And Isaac noticed that his father was quiet. The silence was not common to Abraham. His father was a leader, a talker, not a silent man. The longer they walked, Isaac began to suspect more and more that something just was not right. He didn't know why his father had told the servants to stay behind. He knew his father had a firestone and a knife, tools to offer a sacrifice, but this did not make sense. No sacrifice was designated for that day, and not on Moriah, and the servants were not even with them. Doubts and questions filled him. Isaac wanted to speak to Abraham to ask what was happening and what was to happen, but he did not ask. He did not sense that Abraham wanted to talk, and he knew his father was the father, so surely he had a plan. So the son kept his words and his questions inside, though he desperately wondered what this journey was for. "Father," he finally called, and with no response, louder. "Father!" He shouted it again and again, "Father, Father, Father," until Abraham finally said, "Silence, do not speak, son." "Father, tell me what you are doing." Abraham responded angrily, "Do not ask, be still, let me place you upon this wood." Isaac could not believe what he had just heard. He wanted to run, to scream, to find his mother, to know what had happened to his father to make him say this. The boy asked his father, "How can you tell me to be quiet? You were not quiet when God told you he was going to do something horrible like destroy a city of people." Abraham did not respond to that. He heard his son, but he did not answer. Abraham knew he had only spoken up to God that once before, and he knew that that was not truly his nature. Though his son was proud then, and there were many times before that Abraham had disappointed his son and himself. In the silence, Isaac, shaking under the ropes, found more words. "Father, I am not an animal. I am your son. What is that knife for? What are you doing? What are you thinking?" "Do not question. Do not ask. I am doing what God commanded." Isaac could not believe what he had heard. God wanted this for him? His father wanted this for him? How could that be? Barely able to speak, he asked his father, "God commanded you to do this?" "Yes, my son, I do what God commands. I trust in him. He brought me from my homeland to a better life. He brought me a child, even in my and your mother's old age. I trust in the Lord." Isaac said, "But you also speak against God. When you know God is wrong, you just argued with God for the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, evil people, people you are not related to. And yet you do this to me? God chose you then to instruct your children to keep the way of God by doing righteous justice. You would be rewarded for that. Why now are you not acting with justice and righteousness? My son, you are mistaken. God wanted me to speak up at Sodom and Gomorrah. When I spoke, he didn't silence me. He wanted me to ask and challenge, so I did what was required, as I do now. Isaac was in disbelief. He had thought of his father as strong, as a leader, but now he was hearing otherwise. He could not move as he was being tied down. He could not speak as he could not believe what was happening. So this time, Abraham spoke in the silence. I do what God tells me even when I don't want to. I did not want to go on that journey to leave my homeland. I did not want to go to Egypt, but I had to. We were starving. And on the way there, I didn't want to have to lie and say that your mother was my sister and not my wife. But I did not have a choice. God was forcing us onto unsafe land. God has not been good to me. He has required much of me, and yet I still follow him. He sent angels to tell Hagar, your mother's maidservant, to make her life difficult. God forced me to circumcise myself at the age of 99 and Ishmael at the age of 13. I wanted none of that, but I did it, and now I will do this too, because God tells me to. Isaac could not believe what he was hearing. He had always thought of his father as a strong man, not as someone who did things he did not want to do. Why, Father, do you follow God when he does not treat you with the righteousness and justice with which he asks you to treat others? Abraham did not answer the question. Instead, he picked up the knife and he held it over his son.